Independence 202-748-8002. And we're going to go to the independent line now. Babak is in London, England. What's your question or comment?
Thank you very much for taking my call, and happy 4th of July. My question is about the escalation of war in Ukraine. It's inevitable escalation, and follow on to what Mr. Walton is saying, it seems the only reason that this war has not escalated is lack of ammunition on both sides. So when will the West move from consumer economy to war economy, when then the war factories would start working, and then there will be plenty of ammunition to perhaps confront the Russians, and also take, by war economy, I mean when 10 to 15% of GDP is spent on military spending instead of 2%. So my question is, what is Mr. Walton's prediction on when the West would move to war economy?
Well, great to hear an English voice. Thanks, Babak, for your question. I just got back from London, and I was remembering how much I love it back home. Great question. The war economy, that conjures up from my historical perspective notions of total war, where an economy is geared towards fighting a war effort. We saw that, of course, in the First World War and in the Second World War. I'm not sure if we are there. I think that what we are, hopefully we will not have World War III, hot war. I see this more, the better analogy as a Cold War. So in the later period of the Cold War, in the 20th century, the principle of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, meant, as Ronald Reagan said, that a nuclear war between superpowers could never be won and therefore must never be fought. Both sides have the capability of incinerating the planet, and therefore we have to find any and all ways not to go to hot war between the superpowers. The same principle, it seems to me, applies today with Russia and China and the West. So I think the Cold War analogy is perhaps better than total war, World War, Second World War. If Putin, though, does what we talked about earlier and either fabricates an accident at a nuclear power plant or sets off a tactical nuke, perhaps over the sea, as a way of blackmailing NATO, I really don't know how we're going to respond other than, we follow what the National Security Advisor has said publicly over here, which is there will be a devastating, overwhelming response, and wouldn't get drawn onto that. But your point about the economy and how we're going to drive this forward, this is what makes the situation with Russia and particularly China so much more difficult than, if you like, the sort of simplistic past of the previous Cold War. The Soviet Union, like Russia today, actually produces very little that the rest of the world wants. So, apart from oil, petrochemicals, the Soviet Union was effectively ring-fenced off from the world economy as a pariah state. And that is clearly not the case with China today. So this is why policymakers in Washington and indeed London are bending over backwards to say this isn't a Cold War. We don't want to think of it that way. It's because the economic interdependence and China's massive economic weight makes it so much more complex than the Cold War in the 20th century was. But if Putin were to do the unthinkable and to break with the entire history of post-war international security and to detonate a tactical nuclear weapon, then I think that we are in the territory of where you described, of where economies need to be put more on a war footing. I don't know when that will happen, and in fact, I think we all pray that it doesn't happen. So I'm afraid that's a long way of saying I don't know. I think that looking at total war is not, thankfully, where we are right now. It could well, I'm afraid, become like that. But the Cold War analogy is where we are. It's a Cold War in that it can't turn hot. We have to pray that it remains cold and does not turn hot.